social justice work and interfaith endeavors. He's proud to nurture connections between TBK and several area churches and mosques, and sits on several area interfaith clergy associations. Rabbi Stein is an avid tennis player and trombone player. He is married to Amy, and together they are the proud parents of Eliana and Barb. Thank you for being here, Rabbi. Thank you for being here, Rabbi.
Okay. Okay, for those of you who don't know me, I'm Rabbi Peter Stein. But one correction I gotta acknowledge, I was actually born in Mississippi and raised the first year of life in Monroe, Louisiana. So that's where that connection comes in. But I'm happy to do this book review with my friend Peter Stein. I'm actually JD Jackson, if you haven't caught on yet. Some might classify this as cruel and unusual punishment, having to do this book review in 48 hours since the most consequential presidential election to date. Yet, we press forward, right? But just for full declaration, I am on the side of those who are in shock and all of the other descriptors that you can use with that. But with the undercurrent of racial tensions, among other things, the timing might be most appropriate for this book review. When we look at this story with its so-called racial tensions, overarching and underlying historical scandal, we uncover a basic skeleton of the framework of America. With that, I turn to page 5 for a little sharing here. They milled around for a while longer and eventually left, promising to return after they pulled the skeleton out of the well and studied the potential murder scene some more. They never did, though, because the next day God wrapped his hands around Chicken Hill and wrung his last bit of justice out of that wretched place. Hurricane Agnes came along and knocked the power out of 4 counties. The nearby Schuylkill River rose to a height of 7 feet. To hear the old black women of Chicken Hill tell it, white folks was jumping off their rooftops in Pottstown like they was on the Titanic. All those fancy homes down there were swept away like dust. That storm killed everything it touched, drowned every man, woman, and child that come near it, wrecked bridges, knocked down factories, tore up farms. That thing caused millions in damages. Millions and millions. That's what white folks' language, millions and millions. Well, for us colored folk on the Hill, it was just another day of dodging the white man's evil. As for the old Jew and his kind, that was on this hill. They got all their time back from them that stole everything from them. And the Jew lady they wronged, Miss Chona, she got her justice too. For the King of Kings fixed her up for all the good things she done, lifted her up, filled up her dreams in an instant, in only the way he can. The evil fool who called himself Son of Man, he's long gone from this country. And that boy Dodo, the deaf one, he's yet living. They put that whole camp up there in Montgomery County now on account of him. The Jews did. Theater owners they was. God bless them. And them cops and big-time muckety-mucks that was running behind them Jews for the body they found in that old well. They can't find a speck against them now, for God took the whole business, the water, the well, the reservoir, the dairy, the skeleton, and every itty-bitty thing they could use against them Jews, and washed it clear into the Manatawny Creek. And from there, every single bit of that who shot John nonsense got thrown into the Kill, and from there, it flowed into the Chesapeake Bay, down in Maryland, and from there out to the Atlantic. And that's where the bones of the rotten scoundrel, whose name is not worthy to be called by my lips, is floating to this day at the bottom of the ocean, with the fish picking his bones and the devil keeping score. From my perspective, this is a common viewpoint that in the world of the haves and the have-nots, predominantly white on one side and black on the other, with everything else mixed in between that spectrum, the haves, they rule. In this ruling, injustice often prevails. Yet those recipients of injustice must yet still carry on and live. Some prevail while others get caught up in systems where they ultimately meet their demise. In the midst of it all, though, most of us simply push forward toward lives of community, lives toward survival, and lives toward justice. With that, I have another piece that I'll read to you. This is found on page 220. It begins, "She felt rent in too by guilt, for not once in all their years together had he muttered a word of grievance or protest about her store, which never made a dime, and her unwillingness to move off the hill, or that she'd been unable to give him a son or daughter. He was a true Jew, a man of ideas and wit, who understood the meaning of celebration and music, and that the blend of those things meant life itself, and how she regretted watching his face, locked in grief, even as he slept, his lip trembling, that she fretted hours away reading about socialists and unions and progressives and politics and corporations, fighting about a meaningless flag that said, 'I'm proud to be an American,' when it should have said, 'I'm happy to be alive,' and what the difference was, and how one's tribe cannot be better than another tribe because they were all one tribe. An extraordinary wisdom came upon her, one she had not imagined possible, and she wanted to share it with him in those first or perhaps last moments of her consciousness." Friends, I believe that when we all reach this level of consciousness, that we are indeed moving toward truly being one tribe, one people, and one nation. Then and only then can we indeed achieve what the Buddhists call nirvana, which represents the ultimate goal of spiritual practice, liberation from that cycle of birth and death. 2 more readings, and then I will conclude. One on page 225. And it reads, "Our group of well-wishers slowly moved down the hallway as Moshe's sobs cascaded up and down the walls, bouncing from one side to the other. The discourse on Doc Roberts was forgotten now as the group trumped forward, a ragtag assortment of travelers moving 15 feet as if it were 15,000 miles. Slow travelers all, arrivals from different lands, making a low trek through a country that claimed to be so high, a country that gave them so much, yet demanded so much more. They moved slowly, like fussgayers, wanderers, seeking a home in Europe or Eru, West Africa, tribesmen herded off a ship on a Virginia shore to peer back across the Atlantic in the direction of their homeland one last time, moving toward a common destiny, all of them, Isaac, Nate, and the rest, into a future of America, of American nothing. It was a future they couldn't quite see, where the richness of all they had brought to the great land of promise would one day be zapped into nothing. The glorious tapestry of their history boiled down to a series of 10-second TV commercials, empty holidays, and sports games filled with the patriotic fluff of red, white, and blue. The celebrants cheering, the accompanying dazzle, without any idea of the horrible struggles and proud paths of their forebears who had made their lives so easy. The collective history of this sad troop moving down the hospital corridor would become tiny blots in an American future that would one day scramble their proud histories like eggs, scattering them among the population while feeding metal junk into the populace on devices that would become as common and small as the hot dog that the dying woman thought she smelled. For in death, Chona had smelled not a hot dog, but the future. A future in which devices that fit in one's pocket and went zip zap and zilch delivered a danger far more seductive and powerful than any hot dog. A device that children of the future would clamor for and become addicted to. A device that fed them their oppression, disguised as free thought. Had the group of stragglers mopping down the hallway seen that future, they would have all turned en masse and rushed from the hospital out into the open air, collapsed onto the lawn, and sobbed like children. As it was, they moved like turtles towards Chona's room as Moshe's howl rang out. They were in no hurry. Their journey ahead was long. There was no promise ahead. There was no need to rush now. Neither moved to console him. It occurred to him in that moment that he had rarely touched either one of them physically. His wife had done those things. His wife had not been afraid to hug Addie or grab a reluctant Nate by the hand to show him something, or hug Dodo, or cuff a female customer playfully on the face or arm, or place an arm around a woman's shoulder, or pick up a Negro child who was wailing. Those things were almost forbidden in this country, he realized. Chona had never been one to play by the rules of American society. She did not experience the world as most people did. To her, the world was not a china closet where you admire this and don't touch that. Rather, she saw it as a place where every act of living was a chance for Tikkum Olam to improve the world. The tiny woman with the bad foot was all soul. Big Moshe was a foot taller, yet she was the big one. He was just a man who put music shows together, a promoter, a man without a song of his own. Friends, I leave you with this thought. Find a song of your own and take time out to sing it, to practice it good, and do all you can to improve this world that we live in. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's really a pleasure to be here with all of you. Thank you to Dina and the leadership here at the library for this program and for all the opportunities that they create for us all year long. In your very generous introduction, which occurred to me, took longer to read than it took me to cross the street to come here, there was a mention of one of my primary commitments, primary interests, and that has to do with the field of toxic polarization and relationship building across lines of difference. And it's really coming out of that interest that I was very happy to have the chance to read and reflect on this book and to have the chance to be together today with my friend JD. JD and I had a fatal flaw in our planning, it occurs to me. which is we met for lunch last week to sort of finalize our notes and what we wanted to do. We met last week. Something happened between last week and today, which we all recognize. And without offering any kind of political commentary, I'll simply say that for me, it really reinforces that concern about polarization, about division across lines of difference, and the really essential need that we have to build up relationships and to unite. One of the passages that JD made reference to was the one that talked about the idea of the flag that said, "I'm proud to be an American." And I think the challenge that is before us is how, in some way, we can find our way to make that proclamation. Some may be ready in this moment to make that proclamation. Others may have some very hard and important work to do to get to or return to that point. One of the things I appreciated most about the book was the way that it lifted up in really evocative language, really very compelling language, the different identity groups that were living in this town in Pennsylvania. Some of them were very light references, some of them were more serious. So for example, throughout the book, there are the many different ways that the Yiddish language comes into play. And JD and I met and said, yeah, we're running to the dictionary to find out what all of these things may be. But here was, I thought, one of the great examples of the colorful way that this was used, to use the Yiddish language as a way of really forcing us to think about identity, who we are, how to identify, what languages do we speak, what languages came down through our family history. So it's the passage that talks about the flyer for the upcoming dance show. And the original flyer in Yiddish said, "Come see the great Mickey Katz, once in a lifetime event, family, fun, and Jewish memories, red hot klezmer like you've never heard before." And those of you who read the book may recall that the problem was the translated ad done by someone who really didn't know their Yiddish translated the ad to say, "Mickey Katz is coming. Once a life, always a life. Watch the Jews burn and dance and have fun." So certainly not anything too serious, but again, a way of really saying, let's think about identity. What are the cultural norms? What are the different ways that we identify ourselves? There's another passage just a few pages later where Moshe is just beyond frustrated and has his guard up and doesn't want to engage in Yiddish. The person comes in and says, "Good morning," in Yiddish, and Moshe replied in English, "What do you want?" For he was in no mood for favors. The man again spoke in Yiddish, "Don't you remember me?" Which irritated Moshe even more. It meant he definitely wanted something. And then Moshe snapped off a quick response in Yiddish, "Get lost," and pushed the door to close it. So it's one of those examples, the way that this is done, the one throughout the book. And then there's the other element of the way Chana is described, the American-born Chana, who looks down on the Yiddish-speaking immigrants. So you have that evolution happening really very, very quickly within this cohort, this group of people. Other aspects of identity that came through in what I thought was a really compelling way include the way that the doctor was described, Doc Roberts. So the example that I'll lift up is that Doc Roberts was called, quote, "the town's pride, the hometown boy made good," which was followed by a lengthy description of his involvement with the Ku Klux Klan. So you have these kinds of elements. You have identity based on religion, identity based on culture, identity based on immigrant status, identity based on wealth, identity based on neighborhood, where one was living, as opposed to where one was not allowed to live. And part of what we recognize reading a book that is set 100 years ago is to inevitably think about how some of those identities have changed over this century, and not just identities, but relationships. So JD and I are both really honored to have this opportunity to have read the book together and share together. And part of that is because of the relationship that the two of us have, coming from different personal identities, different faith traditions, and yet sharing so many hopes and dreams for our community and for our world. And so we, many, many times over, are able to link arms and work for the common good, work for what we understand as urgent needs for justice in our community. And yet, the relationship that we have today is very different than the relationship that was had decades ago between members of the Jewish community and members of the Black community. Those relationships have changed in very dramatic ways, often not for the good. There's a distance that has grown in many corners. There's a lack of comfort or common understanding. And yet, one of the things personally that we work on creating is recognizing that we do have a tremendous amount in common that both the Jewish community and the Black community face in some places very common challenges. And so that was something that really came to mind when I was thinking about the way that the book talked, the different pictures that were painted. And the other piece of it that I'd love to reflect on is this neighborhood of Chicken Hill. So Chicken Hill was this really vibrant neighborhood. It was a neighborhood that intertwined several different groups, all of whom in one way or another were oppressed, were disadvantaged, were discriminated against in one way or often in several ways. So it was a neighborhood, you had the Jewish community, the Black community, the immigrant community, all of these both struggling and ambitious people finding common cause and building up this neighborhood. They were on the margins of white America. If we use that as the broad distinction, we have this really amazing place that was set apart from the mainstream, what in the book is considered to be white America. And so reading about this neighborhood of Chicken Hill, it allowed me to think about some of my own hopes and dreams, some of my own vision for our neighborhood, for our community. I'll comment as an aside that my first pulpit was in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and I lived in Squirrel Hill, which is a remarkable neighborhood in our country. And one of my fellow pastors, one of my fellow faith leaders in Squirrel Hill in Pittsburgh, you may have heard his name, was a man named Fred Rogers. Mr. Rogers was a Presbyterian minister, served a church in Pittsburgh before he devoted himself full-time to his ministry of television and taking care of people in that way. And that experience really was formative because Squirrel Hill in no way was a dreamland. In no way was it a place of perfection, but it was very much a cohesive community made up of different groups, all of whom in one way or another were somehow apart from the mainstream. And so I've carried that with me. And when I think about Brighton in particular, that's always been my hope for our community, that we can be, in a sense, like Chicken Hill, this vibrant, active place where people of very distinct identity groups find common cause, build up a closeness and an understanding. Part of that is standing up against hatred. God willing, we could build up this kind of relationship, this kind of neighborhood and community without there being hatred that we need to oppose. But being realistic, that is the reality that we face and will face for some time. I'd love to say that we're going to have a world where there isn't any kind of discrimination or bigotry, where there isn't any kind of violence or hate speech and so on. When we get there, we can have another discussion. But for now, it's reading the book, which of course was set in a very distinct place 100 years ago in this neighborhood filled with Jewish immigrants and poor Black families, and how they found their way together. That, to me, recognizing that we're reading a novel and not a textbook or not a call to action kind of book, but nonetheless, I think the way that the images are painted in the book caused me to think about this neighborhood and then our own neighborhoods and how we can possibly build them up to fully reach our potential. Just one more brief passage, and then I know that we'd each be happy to entertain questions that we can ask of each other, or that you can ask of us, or maybe you'll just ask of each other, and we'll just observe. So really a poignant passage towards the end of the book, and it says, "The closing of the Heaven and Earth grocery store was not something that Moshe ever imagined doing. It was harder than going through Chana's things in their bedroom, for closing the store involved working in the basement. And in the basement, he found a tiny wooden barrel and wooden spoon that he recognized. She was spinning yellow into butter in that barrel when he first wandered into that basement 12 years before, with a head full of problems and a world full of debt. She was the only one in the world who would remember that first moment." So to me, such a powerful image of relationship, of the importance of relationship, finding people that understand us in unique ways, finding people that we can travel with and work alongside and make an impact and have that kind of a unique understanding. There to me was a tremendous poignancy in that image there. So again, thank you for the opportunity. Let me stop here. JD, do you want to ask me anything, or have me ask you? Otherwise, we can. We have an eager audience as well. But
We can throw it to the audience and then come back.
great. So again, wait for the microphone to come to you before you ask your question, so others can hear. Will you pass the mic? Oh, that's great.
Either of you want to talk about whether or not you would recommend the novel or James McBride's writing in general, and what you personally thought of the book?
Yeah. Well,
Go ahead. Yep, go ahead.
yeah. I would definitely recommend the book. I learned a lot. As Peter stated, I was looking doing my Google searches on a lot of the Yiddish that might surprise you. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I learned a little bit, and also, some of the names. I should have known the Hana. Yeah, I was saying Chana, but one of my good friends is Hava, that's spelled with a CH. So, nevertheless, I picked up quite a bit just reading the book, so I would recommend it. How many of you have read the book? Oh,
nice.
Wow. Okay. Great. All right.
Gold stars for everyone.
Yes, gold stars for everyone.
Yes, and so I really appreciated the book. I think it's a good read. I loved his use of language. It takes a little sort of getting used to the bouncing around the different time periods and all, but I thought he did a very, very good job of really bringing things to life, going from the lighter moments to the harder moments as well. The really vibrant language that he used in moments like the attack in the store and other things that, yes, I just simply said, yes, I think it's a good book and a book that's well worth reading. So towards the back, there's yep.
I read this book because I first read a book called The Color of Water, which is a memoir by James McBride, who grew up as a Black man with a white mother, I believe, in New York City. And I was so impressed with that, but then when this came out, I was determined to read
me, it was actually a little more, it pulled me in. So I was learning a little more beyond, just the assignment. So I was fascinated with that.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I didn't know if you
Oh, it's fine.
wanted to chime in.
So,
There was an interview done with James McBride about this book on PBS, and he said that he wanted to write it to give his grandmother a happy life because she did not have a happy life in real life. Do you think he succeeded?
So there's so many painful moments in the book that it's really a question about in retrospect, writ large, was it a happy life? And I think it was. I think there was a lot of passion. There was a lot of important and beautiful friendship. So I can't speak specifically to the grandmother piece, but I think he did do a good job of painting a picture of a really difficult life that was a good life too.
I have a question, and now I have the mic.
Please.
In talking about like divisions between people, I feel like just from observation, a lot seems to come from everyone wants to be correct. They want to be the right. They want to be right. So when it comes to religion and it's your belief, and people, such as yourselves, come together because you have equal hopes for people and love and success and togetherness. What would your advice be for getting past needing to be right about something and just agreeing on the parts that bring us together?
You want to try first?
I'll try that.
Oh, you still have that mic. So.
I guess like Nike, just do it. I'm not Jewish. Peter's not. I haven't converted him over to being Baptist. So we just come together. We know what we personally believe, but we're both, if I can say this, progressive in the way that we approach life, religion, and everything. I think that's just the way to do it. I've learned quite a bit from him. I'm hoping he's learning something from me too.
Absolutely.
So, and a meal is always helpful too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
person is different than you out for a meal.
I think between the way you framed the question, the way you answered, really the pieces are there, which to me is being right isn't what is important. That's not where the focus needs to be. It's each maintaining their own distinctiveness, their own perspective, and finding common cause, finding ways to build a relationship. Even if you disagree, there are still ways that you can be connected. I had the opportunity earlier in the week of speaking at St. Thomas More, one of the Catholic churches in town that has a regular Bible study group. And they had asked me there so they could learn about Judaism. And our conversation really centered in two places. One was the historical, looking back at the first century and the formation of Rabbinic Judaism and the origins of Christianity. And then the second place was the lived Judaism and the lived Catholicism of our own time. And almost at the very end of the hour, the question about abortion came up. And we were able to sort of finish our conversation in a very honorable, very beautiful way. They weren't flinching from their stance opposing abortion. I wasn't shying away from my own stance from a faith perspective in support of the freedom of access and the freedom of that kind of healthcare. And yet we were able to have this conversation and ended the hour and recognized that there was something very special and very important about focusing on what we have in common. But at the same time, focusing on what we have in common shouldn't take us away from what makes us different, because we're not just trying to say, I'm right, therefore you're wrong. I'm Jewish, you're Baptist, and therefore we have to, all become Presbyterian or something. I don't know. It's so.
Thank you.
Hi, I started out in a very Jewish world with very Orthodox people. And as I was, and in my life now, I am surrounded by people of many different faiths, and raised my children in Brighton and loved that they had this tapestry of friends. While I was reading the book, the issue of the mikvah came up, and the need for water. And as I'm sitting here with two of my very dear non-Jewish friends, I wondered about the non-Jews reading the book and the mikvah, if they truly understood what it is in Jewish faith. So I don't know what percentage of the group is Jewish and the percent of the group here is not. Could you please share what the mikvah is to the group?
Great. Thank you. Thanks so much. It's an important question just in terms of what was being referenced. So the mikvah, which is a Hebrew word, it refers to the ritual bath. And it is a tradition that goes back into biblical times. If you travel to Israel today, to some of the archaeological sites, you will find mikvahs there that match exactly the way the mikvah is constructed to this day. So the ritual bath is used for various different ceremonies of purification and transformation. So in the observant community, the Orthodox community, the mikveh is used by women after menstruation each month. The mikveh is used by men and women before the high holy days begin. It's used by brides and grooms before the wedding ceremony. And very importantly, it is used as part of the ceremony of conversion. When one converts to Judaism, part of that is immersion in the mikveh. And so the mikveh becomes one of the very, very centrally important pieces of building up a flourishing Jewish community. When Jews move into a new community, the very first thing that they need to build is a cemetery, because without consecrated ground, they can't have a proper funeral. And so that becomes, ironically, the very first thing that needs to be taken care of, because worship services and classes and social gatherings and so on, those can take place in people's homes. Those can take place in other community settings until they reach the point where they want to build those up. So in order, the very first thing that is built typically in a Jewish community is a cemetery. And the second thing that is built in the Jewish community is a mikveh. It is that central a tradition between, as I said, monthly purification, weddings, holidays, Shabbat, the Sabbath each week, conversion. The mikveh is used to kosher dishes and pots and pans. So it is very, very important. So if you think in that way of a brand new Jewish community, how do you build it up? Cemetery is number one, just for practical reasons. But the first thing you're going to build, even before a synagogue, even before a school, is going to be the mikveh. And so it is not accidental that he very prominently features the mikveh and the need for water for the mikveh in the novel. So it's a thank you so much for the question.
More hands up?
Yep.
Knew we could count on me.
Thank you, Dina. Thank you for the superb presentation, both of you. My question is, in the book, and I love this author, I agree with the lady, the first book is well worth reading. In this book, they coalesce around a specific problem to work together to make it improve. Is there anything you could take from this book that could be transferred pose to our community that we share that would build stronger bridges and bring better understanding, especially in these very stressful times. Good thing you're a rabbi and a minister.
You want to? I have a thought too, but I can.
Having book discussions like this, that's a start to bring folks together. Like I said,
Thank you.
A meal. I know Brighton had, the Rotary had the spaghetti dinner the other day. Well, that brought a lot of people together on election day. But, you know, just any opportunity that you can to bring folks together is a start.
Okay. So I would build on JD's answer. It's such an important question, and I would actually take directly from what happened in the book, which is, I think, keeping a focus on children and the needs of children. Hopefully that brings us all together for a common purpose without too much division, that we all want our children to be healthy, to thrive, to succeed. We all want our children to have nutritious food. We all want children with the whole array of special needs to have access to the services that they need. And that crosses all sorts of lines of identity. So if we imagine how we can elevate our community, I think the starting point is on children and their array of needs. And then from there, of course, if we're working together for the sake of children, then inevitably we're going to be working together as adults as well. So, and there was a follow-up there? Yeah.
One more, I'm sorry. I never make it, but Rabbi, would you mention the interfaith service to these people? Some of them may not know about it.
Talking about the Mount Olivet service?
And what we do is Thanksgiving.
Oh, yes, thank you. So, thank you so much. So, Rochester, one of Rochester's claims to fame is that we have the longest running interfaith Thanksgiving service in the country. And it has been going on for well over 150 years. And every single year we meet people from all different faith traditions and no faith at all coming together. This year it's on Thanksgiving morning. So many people sort of time their cooking. So put the turkey in the oven, come to the service, put the pie in, things like that. So it is 11 o'clock on Thanksgiving morning. And this year the service will be at Temple Sinai. So at Temple Sinai, 11 o'clock Thanksgiving morning. For those who can't come in person, the service will be also available through their YouTube channel. So if you are not on any of the synagogue or church email lists that are distributing the information, feel free to send me a message at Brit Kodesh, and I'll be happy to get you that information. But 11 o'clock in the morning, Thanksgiving morning at Temple Sinai, which is on Penfield Road. Thank you. I knew it was Penfield Road. I was just second guessing myself. Great. Okay. I can keep doing ads. That's fine.
Maybe time for about two more. Can I see any other hands? I'm going to chime in on what you said about food and children too, bringing people together. So I have an 8-year-old at home, and even just from hearing the stories from her, based on the past couple of years before the election, the kids absorb whatever their parents are saying. And I remember as a kid just siding with whatever my parents were saying about whatever issue was going on in the world, even though you have no idea the greater extent of it. Do either of you want to talk about just ways to discuss things with children, or ways that have worked for you in terms of explain the world to children? How do you help me?
Once I understand it, I will be happy to explain it to others. It's such an important question. And so many are asking as parents, as grandparents, and so on. And I am a believer in honesty and simplicity. And what I mean by that is, first of all, parents know their children best. So a parent will know best what their child is capable to understand. It's a question I answer a lot when it comes to grief and mourning. A family has suffered a loss, and the question is, how do we talk about death to our children or grandchildren and so on? And I think honesty and simplicity and really personalizing the answer to the individual. And then I think the other piece is, while there's certainly nothing wrong with giving sort of brutally honest answers that show your feelings about either the issues or the individuals, I think that part of our role can be to model assuming good intent. That we may, to the core of our being, disagree with someone who has been elected to office. I think we can still say they are putting themselves out there to serve the community, to serve the country. And while you don't have to lather on praise that is disingenuous, I think you can model good intent and assuming good intent, because once you do that, then you have sort of the ability to speak up, even for ourselves, taking it a little bit away from talking with kids. One of the things that has been very important to me is building up relationships with people who are in public office. And I do that not for ego and not for myself. I do that because it's part of my responsibility as a community leader. And so what that means is I'm in dialogue with community leaders, whether we agree or whether we disagree, but we have an overarching relationship that allows us to have the conversation. So I think that's a piece of it as well, is let's err on the side of good intent, even if we fundamentally disagree with someone who has been elected or is serving.
I agree with everything he said.
We do have one more hand there. So.
All right, while I pass it this way though, Reverend, what meal would you recommend?